Have you ever talked to the dead? I believe I've talked to the dead. Well, it all happened whenever I was 9 or 10 years old. It was Halloween, and unfortunately, that year we didn't get to go trick or treating. We didn't get to go because there was this major storm that had brewed up all that day and into the night. My parents had decided to go out that night, and they left my three brothers and my sister and I there at the house. And my sister also had a friend staying the night. So since we missed going trick or treating, my mother bought us like 5 bags of candy and a new game board. My sister asked if I wanted to play with her and her friend, so I did, and as we unpackaged the game, they began telling me about it, and I was excited and secretly a little alarmed as they started to explain how to play the game. The game was explained as a gateway to summon spirits and ghosts and any other kind of creatures that you may want to communicate with. All we had to do was put our hands on the planchet and start asking the dead questions, and in turn, they would respond by moving the planchet on the board to spell out words. So I'm sure you all know by now that the new great board game we received was a Ouija board. So the three of us started to play, and we asked questions, and finally we started talking to someone. It was an older woman, and she told us about her life and how many kids she had and how she had passed away and everything like that. But then suddenly she moved the planchet to goodbye. And we kept asking and no one was there. But then all of a sudden, someone started talking to us. And it was a man, and he told us his name. And by the things that he was telling us, and the way that he would move the planchet on the board, he would jerk it all over the place. We could tell that he was angry. But then my sister's friend decides to ask this one question. The one question that you never want to ask while playing the Ouija board. She asks, if you're really there, then show us some sign of your presence. Immediately, we look at each other wide-eyed and start to look around the room, and within seconds of asking the question, we hear this violent rattle of the back door handle, which was the signature noise it made whenever it was opened. Then we heard 3 loud stomps. All of us immediately threw the board game up and started screaming and crying. And my brother came running around the corner, my oldest brother, and he said, "What's wrong?" Well, my sister started to tell him what happened. And so he grabs his baseball bat, he goes out to the back room and where the back door was, and he comes back and he says, "Well, there's nobody there." But the back door was wide open. So, needless to say, I've never played with another Ouija board or tried to talk to the dead ever again. Hello, my name is Victoria Myers, and if you like that story, then you likely like the literary genre of horror. So today I'm sharing my presentation titled The Art of Things That Go Bump in the Night. According to Philip Talon, who wrote Through a Mirror Darkly, Art Horror as a Medium for Reflection, says that as a genre, horror doesn't like you. Horror doesn't care if it causes you to lose sleep. Horror doesn't mind if it frightens you so much it makes you swear off of something you love, like camping or swimming in the ocean. In essence, horror is a jerk. So if horror is so horrid, why do so many people love it? In all honesty, I did not come to speak on horror like our professor suggested because it was my favorite genre, but rather I actually chose to speak on horror precisely because I'm amazed people even want to read books about demonic possession, watch horror movies filled with like grotesque scenes, or read documentaries of serial killers. Horror is just really not my cup of tea. So really my interest was piqued to better understand this fascination with the genre that people have. So, I would like to take you along on my research journey to learn more about horror. Now, although to some the horror genre may appear distasteful, embarrassing, or not even a viable genre, with a little research, a better appreciation for, understanding of, and a need for this genre can be established. So horror, I found out, is a very interesting genre, mostly because it is actually so diverse and unique. A major aspect of why this genre is so hard to understand is because it seems to easily morph into 2 other genres: science fiction, which is one of my favorites, and fantasy. The horror genre is often looked down upon by scholars. Jason Calavito, the author of Knowing Fear, Science, Knowledge, and the Development of the Horror Genre, says, quote, "Many scholars do not recognize horror as a distinct genre, but prefer to see it as a subset of the fantasy and science fiction genres." So although, some genres like romance or mystery or Western, adventure, whatever we have, they all seem to kind of have their own realm, and they don't run into each other, or the lines don't get blurred or confused with other genres like these three do. So horror is a genre, it's focused on bringing the emotions of dread, tension, and of course fear, and usually utilizing a monster of some type. So these unique characters may include anything from vampires, werewolves, zombies, mad scientists, demons, ghosts, serial killers, psychopaths, the bad child, possessed person, or otherworldly beings. One question that I would like to know from everyone is, what is your favorite literary or film monster of all time? So if you'll just share it in our research comments, I would appreciate that. But let's move on. So my main question is, why do people crave horror? Well, from my research, I discovered several potential reasons that the horror genre is pleasing to the average viewer. First of all, as we look at the meaning of the word monster, which derives from the Latin word monere, meaning to warn, we see that these monsters likely represented things in society that the authors may have been trying to warn us of. For example, Mary Shelley, who wrote the novel Frankenstein in 1817, seems to warn us how there are dangers through scientific exploration and through tinkering with nature. So some other examples of this in literature we see is like in 1001 Nights, Godzilla, The Fly, Jurassic Park. These are all instances where people are kind of messing with science or nature, and we get these bizarre creatures or monsters because of that. So the second reason for this love of horror that I found was explained by PhD professor of English David Schmidt, who says, quote, "Our society safely represents and addresses the anxieties and fear of our time through the use of monsters." End quote. So what seems to be the source behind all these societal fears that we play out through monsters? Well, the most common being that of wars, birth defects, insanity, diseases, aliens, natural disasters, terrorism, magic, witchcraft, supernatural, serial killers, and unfortunately, as we are currently experiencing, even pandemics. All of these things that we as a society worry about come to the forefront in the form of monsters in our horror depictions or art of the time. And of course, I looked at Stephen King, who is one of the most famous and successful horror novelists of all times, to see what he had to say about why people love horror, love to read or watch horror. And he says, quote, "To show that we are not afraid, that we can ride this roller coaster," end quote. So in a sense, it is a thrill ride that gives us this rush of adrenaline. Another unsettling reason that Stephen King shares is how many like the horror genre because it's fun. Stephen says, "But this is where the ground starts to slope away, isn't it? Because this is a very peculiar sort of fun indeed. The fun comes from seeing others menaced, sometimes killed." End quote. That quote is pretty disconcerting to me because I can't even think that the idea of seeing someone killed is fun in any way. It makes me think back to like the Romans who would, pack into the Colosseum to watch people basically fight to their death and die in grotesque ways, or the Inquisitions where people were tortured or burned at the stake, or public lynchings where people would actually come just for the entertainment of watching somebody else die. Now, it doesn't seem natural to me, but it is evidently something fun for other people. Stephen shares he adds another thing to this list of reasons people love the horror genre whenever he says, quote, our anti-civilization muscles demand periodic exercise, end quote. So he is saying that we had this opportunity before we became civilized to indulge in this fun activity, but now we don't have this opportunity, so horror basically fills the void. And I thought, as scary as that may sound, if people truly have these feelings, I guess I would have to agree with Stephen King that at least this is a safe avenue to vent them. So perhaps there is more than just a pleasure seeking fulfilled through horror, but maybe there's really a need, no matter how disturbing to some of us that need may be. And last but not least, another reason that people like horror is that it makes people feel better about their own beastliness. Another idea from Philip Talon's paper, Through a Mirror Darkly, he says, "The origins of modern horror provide a vivid presentation of the inherent moral weakness and often present darkness in the human condition." End quote. So when we read or watch anything from the horror genre, we often see examples of the evil that is present in all of us, but that we try to conceal. So a good example or novel of that would be in the Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which was written by Robert Louis Stevenson in 1886. And it's a story about how Dr. Jekyll basically covers up a secret life of evil deeds whenever he becomes Mr. Hyde. And then, of course, he's just haunted by all of those things. So this is a great example of an author showing how we try to box up our evils and how we're not really proud of them, but nonetheless, that evil is still there. Some other literary examples of that would be include Bram Stoker's 1897 Count Dracula, or the many, many novels written about werewolves and even zombies. So, after spending time learning about horror and all the complexities of it, I see that in a sense there is a value or role that the horror genre plays and even a need that it may fulfill. It is a genre that for the most part helps us not only face our fears and anxieties, but may be able to help us cope with them. So in closing, I believe there is art to the things that go bump in the night, and that horror deserves a place on the shelf. I hope, like me, you've come to find that the horror genre is as lively and valuable a genre as any other, even if it's not your favorite cup of tea. Thank you.